stop the fighting. One love, one unity, got to break the bondage. No more borders around me, no more mental slavery. But Marley said it best, stand together and feel alright. But if we fight, let it be for justice. And if we war, let it be for justice. At all costs, let it be for justice. Do what is right, let it be for justice. Let it be for justice. Let it be for justice. No matter what it costs, let it be for justice. Let it be for justice. Inequity, disparities, and violence, oppression, racism. No, I won't be silent. No more barriers for we. We will thrive, prosperity. Marcus Garvey said it best. None but ourselves can free your minds. But if we fight, let it be for justice. No matter what it costs, let it be for justice. Let it be for justice. We the people are from royalty. Royalty. I wish so many of us can see. Keep the culture, be united, stop the violence. Put the power in ourselves, create the franchise. In the news last week, another bomb overseas. I'm so sick of these murders in the streets. But if we fight, let it be for justice. And if we war, let it be for justice. At all costs, let it be for justice. Do what is right.
Greetings and salutations, one and all.
Let it be for justice. Let it be.
How you doing?
No matter what it costs, let it be for justice. Let it be.
Welcome to a brand new week right here on the night shift to DJ Kevin Stew.
For justice.
It's Community and Finance Night.
For justice. No matter what it costs, let it be for justice. Let
And you know, whenever I started this song, we're up to something, right?
Let it be for justice.
The request is that we let it be for justice. That's the title of the track, courtesy of China Nicole.
For justice. Do what is right. Let it be for justice. Let it be for justice. Let it be for justice. No matter what it costs, let it be for justice.
I want to say big ups to everybody that is locked in right now.
Let it be for
all the affiliates all over the globe.
For justice, no matter what it costs.
Big ups to those who are locked in on TuneIn Radio on the night shift with DJ Kevin Stew.
We the people are from
those on Island worldwide, if you can hear me, much love to you guys out of New York.
Us can see.
Big ups to those who are locked in out of New Jersey.
Power and
NIE Radio.
In the news last week, another bomb overseas. I'm so sick of these murders in the streets.
Much love to those on PEMGTV.com. Those locked in from across the pond on One Harmony Radio out of the UK. Top of the morning to you guys in the UK. Big ups to those on the Foundation Radio Network, ClintonLindsay.com. Those who are locked in on WGLRO, Hollywood Radio, and Dusick Media Groups out of Texas. Big up to you. Texas well represented.
For justice, let it be for justice. Let
Of course, those who are locked in right here at the home of the night shift with DJ Kevin Stew, kevinstew.com, and those who are tapped in on Facebook Live.
Let it be for justice. Let.
Now, you guys on Facebook, remember it's only a segment, so don't get too comfortable. Use the link that is pinned in the comment section. It's kevinstew.com for those of you who don't know.
Royalty, I wish so many of us can see.
You are invited to jump into the chat room on kevinstew.com. We call it the Stew Pot. Why? Because we're fancy.
I'm so sick of these murders.
It's where we keep things interactive and bubbling. And remember, kevinstew.com is a judgment-free zone. So you come on over, share your opinions, share your views. We only ask that you keep it respectful.
Let it be for justice.
Because on kevinstew.com, that's where we learn to have acceptance through enlightenment.
Let it be for justice. Let it be for justice. Let it be for justice.
You hear a little activity going on in the background.
I know what it calls. Let it be for justice. Let it be for justice.
Yeah, that's because we're connected.
Be for justice.
Joining me tonight, someone whose job is to find justice or to seek out justice.
Keep the culture, be united, stop the violence. Put the power in ourselves.
For the very first time on the night shift with DJ Kevin Stew, ladies and gentlemen.
I'm so sick of these murders in the streets.
Well, just before that, I do have some segment sponsors to big up and to thank. First of all, I want to say thank you to Pulse Media Group. When being in the moment is priceless, give them a call. They take care of your videos, your photos, your streaming, your ads. They do everything you see here on kevinstew.com, including hosting the website. So you have a wedding, a funeral, a party, a graduation, a seminar, you want to stream it live.
Let it be for justice.
Go ahead and give them a call, 754-999-1140. Or check them out online, pulseemg.com.
From royalty. I
want to say thank you to Althea and her Healing Heavenly Hands. Althea is a licensed massage therapist operating out of Broad County, North Miami, and South Palm Beach counties. She comes to you, bringing her table, her oils, and over 20 years massage therapy experience. Give her a call and make your appointment today, 954-655-9000. Or email her at thealater@att.net. That's thealater@att.net. Outside of paying her, she only has one request: that you get off her table and go sleep somewhere else. Because I always fall asleep. I want to say thank you to Reggae Global Entertainment. Reggae Global Actors, booking agents, take care of your tour management. Handle your business registration, legal service referrals, music production, marketing and promotion, and so much more. Give them a call, 954-804-8199. Or check them out online at reggaeglobalentertainment.com. Thank you to McNeil Trucking. With McNeil Trucking, you're in good hands. They're licensed and insured movers. Give them a call today, 954-406-9740. They'll take care of your moving. Give them a call, tell them you heard about them on the night shift to DJ Kevin Stew. McNeil Trucking.
From royalty.
Thank you very much.
I wish so many of us.
Now that we've taken care of the formalities, got the housekeeping out the way, I do invite you to call a friend, tell a friend, friends of your friends, friends of your enemies, enemies of your friends, and your enemies too, because this is information for everyone. And we're not leaving anybody out. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I I present my guest for the evening. In fact, from this moment on, we turn the broadcast over to him pretty much. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome attorney Frank Powell.
Hi, Kevin.
How you doing, Frank?
I'm fine. How are you tonight?
I am well, thank you. Glad you could join us.
Oh,
Now,
pleasure. Thanks for having me.
oh yes. Now, I can tell you this. This broadcast is no stranger to activities in Texas. Let me put it that way. And you are an attorney in Texas, and one of the main thing that we will be talking about tonight is a case coming out of Texas and things relating to it. The case of Nicole Baukus. Yeah, it's Baukus, right? That's how she pronounces it.
Yes, Nicole Baukus.
It's Baukus, right? And before we get too deep into it, could you just go ahead and introduce yourself for us, please?
Well, like you said, my name is Frank Powell. I'm an attorney in Texas, and I've been working on this case for many years and pretty dedicated to it, along with co-counsel who I work with named Randy Schaefer. He's been on the case for a long time as well, as long as I have. And I work on post-conviction cases, wrongful convictions.
Mm-hmm.
Try to work on DNA cases and shaken baby cases and pretty much anything where there's possibility that there's an innocent person in prison.
Right. And what was it that brought you to this particular case?
This case was local to where I live, and it was a media case locally, so kind of created a lot of local media buzz and a lot of local interest.
Mm. Now, so that those who don't know about it can get a little bit of an idea. Big ups to you guys on Facebook Live. Eric, much love to you, bro. Jan, much love. This this particular case, Nicole Baukus, could you walk us through what it was that happened with her? How did Nicole end up in legal troubles in the first place? Tell us a little bit about the case.
Well, it was summer of 2012, and she and some friends went to a local bar in Spring, Texas.
Mm.
The bar was having an anniversary party, and there was a lot of drinking and socializing going on. And throughout the course of the night, everybody drank a lot. And
Right.
when the bar closed at 2 o'clock, Nicole left the bar. And next thing you know, an hour later, she's involved in a head-on collision on Interstate 45. Her truck was going the wrong way.
Mm.
The collision resulted in the death of 2 teenagers, and a third was injured. Police showed up, did their investigation. They arrested Nicole, took her to the hospital where she was assessed, and took her to the county jail. And about a year later, she had a trial. She pled not guilty going into the trial. Mid-trial, she changed her plea to guilty. Then the jury assessed punishment, and the judge stacked her sentences. And what was known at the time basically is that they prosecuted her with the evidence they put on, which was a shoe was in the floorboard of the driver's side of the vehicle or truck.
Mm-hmm.
They said there was some DNA on the airbag. And Nicole had no memory of the night, or not of the night, of the wreck. Between midnight and 6 a.m., she had no memory. So
Mm-hmm.
based on the evidence that the state had, she was fairly convinced that she probably was guilty, and she changed her plea to guilty. And in 2013, she was sent to prison for a sentence of 15 years on each count of intoxication manslaughter and 8 years on intoxication assault. And the local judge ordered the sentences to run consecutive or stacked, which meant she would have a 38-year sentence and would not be eligible for parole to go home for a minimum of 19 years. And that's what happened in 2012 and 13. And it seemed like it was pretty much a cut and dry case.
Mm-hmm.
But then here we are in 2021, and it's not quite exactly like it was portrayed to be.
All right, so you said she doesn't have any recollection of the accident.
That's correct, Kevin.
Did she recall leaving the bar?
No, I believe her last memories around 12:30, 12 or 12:30 a.m. And then the next memory, I believe, is somewhere around 6 or 6:30 a.m. When she was at the hospital.
Okay. So, based on the fact that she didn't remember anything, she said she couldn't have done it. She is not guilty. But as the case was being presented by the prosecution, she changed her plea.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. Her attorney wanted her to use the defense that she had been drugged at the bar, although she wanted to put on the defense that she was not driving, because what she knew from what she was told is that she was out walking around on the passenger side of her truck. And the first lawyer she had informed her that the state would have a hard time putting her behind the wheel of the truck. But her second lawyer did not want to put that defense on. And then when the state, so they were going to put on a defense of involuntary intoxication, meaning she was drugged or something. And once that defense was not working out in trial as the state was presenting evidence, her lawyer suggested she change her plea to guilty in hope of getting some leniency from the jury on the sentencing. And so that's pretty much what happened. She pled guilty, and then she got her sentence, and the judge stacked them. So that's correct, Kevin.
You see, I'm trying to piece together the events as they occurred here, and I'm pretty sure a lot of the listeners are trying to do the same. Now, those who are listening, if you do want to call in tonight, I do encourage you to do so. You can use the number 773-789-STEW. That's 773-789-7839. 773, one more time, 773-789-7839. You can call in on that number to ask your questions. And of course, you can jump into the stew pot on kevinstew.com and post your questions there. Those of you watching on Facebook Live, you can, for now, post your questions right there on Facebook Live. But I do encourage you to come on over to kevinstew.com and make any comments that you have right there in the stew pot. You don't have to sign up for anything. You don't need to give your firstborn. You don't need to offer a blood sacrifice. Nothing. Just go to the site. You can remain anonymous if you want. You can put your name if you want. Just come interact with us there. All right. So at the bar with friends,
Yes.
who saw her leave? Because she's with friends. So some people must have seen her leave.
Uh, that's correct. I'm not exactly sure who all saw her leave, um, because the bar video actually captured her walking out the door with a friend of hers. The two of them got in Nicole's truck and they stayed in the parking lot for a couple of minutes. Her friend got out of the truck and then walked over to get in her car. And then Nicole, in the driver's seat, drives out of the parking lot of the bar right around 2:02, 2:03 a.m. and drives off the camera view. And then the next thing known is there's a head-on collision about an hour later, and approximately 4, maybe 5 miles from the bar, which only takes about 5-6 minutes to get there. So essentially, Nicole's whereabouts for that hour are essentially still unknown to this day.
Okay.
But we do
Ah,
know that when she left the bar, one of her friends named Megan, who met her there that night,
yes.
she had left earlier and went over to a friend's house, and she testified at the grand jury, and she also testified at trial that she called Nicole um, around, I believe it was 2:08 a.m. and talked to her for 3 minutes. And by 2:08, Nicole had apparently already met up with some people, because Megan testified that she heard men or guys in the background talking while she was on the phone with Nicole. We don't know where Nicole specifically was at that very moment,
Mm-hmm.
but we know she'd already met up with people. And this takes us to about the 2:10, 2:12 time frame.
Okay. All right. So the accident happened about what time you said?
Right around 3 o'clock, maybe 2:59 a.m. or 3 a.m.
Okay. Um. So that right there, Janice. We mentioned you mentioned earlier that there was a defense of her, the possible defense of her being drugged. Was there a toxicology report by chance?
Uh, yes, there was a toxicology report, and it showed alcohol in her system, um, over the legal limit by quite a bit,
Mm-hmm.
2 to 2.5 times, I believe.
Okay.
Uh, it didn't show any substance in her blood that would be consistent with being drugged,
Right.
at least not what they tested for. And essentially, when the toxicologist for the state testified, um, it's when her lawyer suggested that she change her plea. There was a little bit of metabolites of diazepam in her blood, but the toxicologist testified that that would have been there for, I think they thought he testified it would have been there at least 24 hours and therefore could not have been uh, given to her that night. But at any rate, after the toxicologist testified, her lawyer advised her to change her plea to guilty to get leniency from the jury.
That's interesting. Um, her attorney at the time, is that was that a court appointed, a state appointed attorney, court appointed? Was that
Yeah, that's a good question, Kevin. Uh, right after the accident happened, her family hired a local attorney named Kelly Case,
okay?
and he was working with Richard Canlis, and they paid them quite a bit of money actually. And Kelly Case had already by the time this wreck happened, he'd already won the primary, Republican primary, to take over the 9th Judicial District bench and be a judge. So he really was not going to be a lawyer in this case past the first of the year, because he'd be taking over as a judge. And they dropped off the case in November of that year. And her family didn't really have money to hire somebody else. They spent all the money on the first attorney who didn't really do much because he couldn't. So the court appointed her trial attorney in January of 2013. And of course, they thought they got a pretty good draw with court-appointed public defender type attorneys. There's some really, really good ones, and there's some average ones, and then you can get some bad ones, I guess, just like any other profession.
Right.
Family thought they had a pretty good draw because they drew Mike McDougal, and he was the former elected district attorney of Montgomery County. And I think he held that position for over a decade, and that was the person appointed for the case.
Now, for me, with hearing of cases out of Texas, most popularly or most notably being the case of Rodney Reed, I've seen where, the defense or the court-appointed defense could be a little bit shady, could be a little sketchy, could be questionable. In Rodney's case, he has the Innocence Project working on his behalf, and they've done some things that are quite questionable. So, finding a good defense can be, like you said, kind of like a shooting what one of them Texas terms, shooting in a barrel, luck of the draw, flash in a pond, kind of a thing.
Sure.
Now, so they thought they lucked out initially, but why would you say that they thought wrong? This attorney did nothing for Nicole?
Well, I think initially they thought they, had got a pretty good draw on the public defender appointed attorney, because he was the former district attorney, had a lot of experience.
Yeah.
A lot of experience. And I think during the progression of preparing for trial, some of the evidence was coming out and being turned over to Nicole and her attorney from the state, and the evidence they were turning over was looking and pointing to guilt. And McDougal got information that Nicole's blood and DNA was found on the airbag, and that was just the extent of it. And he kind of made the determination and conclusion based on that, and the fact that a shoe was found on the driver's floorboard, that Nicole was driving. So the defense of her not driving, he took it off the table and went with the defense that she was involuntarily intoxicated or drugged. And that was the game plan. The state did not make any offers for Nicole to consider or for her lawyer to present to her. So with no offers, no potential plea deals, Nicole and her lawyer were looking at preparing for and going to a jury trial. And that's exactly what happened in the summer of 2013. Actually, the trial started July 29th, 2013.
Okay. So you're saying, I noticed your choice of words. The evidence that was turned over to the defense by the state. Is that implying that there may have been more evidence on hand?
Yeah, that's exactly how it has played out in the last 8 years. There was an enormous amount of other evidence that was not turned over, or if it was turned over,
It wasn't used.
well, it wasn't reviewed or looked at or analyzed by her attorney, because he and the investigator weren't looking at the evidence to see whether Nicole was actually driving or not, and they weren't looking at it from that perspective. He had made a conclusion that she was the driver and took that defense off the table. So what was turned over wasn't adequately analyzed. But more importantly, the state, the prosecutors on the case, they didn't turn over anything in the file that would have been helpful. Even though they had it, they just kind of turned it over and said, here, you go find it. And there was a lot of stuff in the file that they had that points to someone other than Nicole driving. And that stuff wasn't pointed out to her lawyer, so she couldn't use it and make decisions of whether or not to use the defense of not driving at trial and let a jury decide whether she was actually the one responsible or not. So
Okay, so let's address that part for a moment. And for those who are locked in on Facebook Live, I'm going to encourage you to use the link and come on over to kevinstew.com right now, because this is where we're going to part company. Thank you for your appreciation. I truly appreciate love you. Thank you for your support. But come on over to kevinstew.com and continue listening for some information there, because this clearly gets deeper. And it's speaking more and more to that question of, was everybody playing above board here, or was it all about putting another W under the belt? So let me ask, going back to this evidence that was turned over to the defense by the state, does the state normally let's talk about how this judicial system works, how it is supposed to work. So the prosecution's job is to find the accused guilty. The defense's job is to prove without the shadow of a doubt that the accused is guilty. And the defense's job is to at least cast a shadow of a doubt, if not prove innocence.
Well, I would disagree with that. The state's job is to ensure that justice is done, not convict somebody. Sometimes they need to analyze a case, and if they don't think they have the evidence to support a conviction, some prosecutors dismiss the cases. As far as the defense, the job is to put on the best defense and do the best that the defense attorney can to, let the jury see all the evidence and, make a decision. And hopefully, when an attorney's defending somebody, they're always hoping, obviously, in a jury trial for a not guilty verdict. But I wouldn't say that it's not the defense's job to prove anything. It's up to the state to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. It's not up to the defense to prove innocence.
Well, I used to hear that was the case, but it doesn't seem to be the case anymore. More and more we're hearing these of these exonerations happening. We're hearing of people being released from years of incarceration after evidence has surfaced
Yes. The post-conviction work is a little different than the trial work. At the trial, it's beyond a reasonable doubt standard for the prosecution. A lot of the post-conviction work that the Innocence Project and other people work on, if they're trying to exonerate somebody, oftentimes they do need to show innocence through DNA testing or whatever, because the state and the judicial system pretty much have the deck stacked against the prisoners, those convicted, because they want to have finality in the process and not upset jury verdicts or guilty pleas easily. Because if it was easy to do, the courts would be filled with these types of cases. So the threshold's pretty hard to get across, and oftentimes proven innocence is required to exonerate somebody.
Right. So here we are looking at Nicole's case. And evidence is there that can possibly say, we don't have a clear-cut case here. That evidence was turned over to the defense, but it wasn't. For me to get a clear understanding, it wasn't evidence that was just there plain to see. You'd have to do some digging to identify it.
Yeah, a lot of the evidence was buried in lengthy police videos and audios. One police video that's crucial to this case was not even turned over to Nicole's attorney until after trial had already started, a jury was seated, and then they turn over a police video. Other evidence was just buried among other stuff. And like I said before, a lot of the evidence the lawyer just did not look at because he was not so much concerned about the videos from the police at the scene that night. He was more concerned about video from the bar, trying to figure out whether there was a drink spiked or something like that. So kind of focus was not where it should have been. And on top of that, the state wasn't meeting their obligation to specifically turn over and point out exculpatory materials. They didn't do that for whatever reason.
No, I'm not trying to call out Texas on anything, but generally speaking, across the country, just I have to ask this question because we're on the subject. In other cases that you have possibly come across, colleagues working on cases or such, being consulted on for advice, whatever, has this been the standard where the state's prosecution may have evidence that they can't use to prosecute their case, but they go ahead and prosecute it and bury it in the mass of information that is passed on to the defense? Is that a standard practice?
Well, I don't know if I'd say it's standard practice. I hope that most prosecutors are ethical and do the right thing, but unfortunately, not all of them are. So how widespread it is, I don't think there's any way to tell, because there are unknown number of cases out there where there may be exculpatory evidence that was not turned over for one reason or another that might have made a difference in the outcome of a proceeding, could have resulted in a not guilty verdict or dismissal or a plea bargain.
Yes.
Rather than what happened in that case. And I'm not citing any particular case.
Mm-hmm.
I just know from the caseload that I read and all the cases that the Innocence Project works on and other attorneys that do post-conviction work. There's a lot of cases out there that would make someone lose faith in the system, and And I say that because anyone who looks at some of these cases, you mentioned Rodney Reed. Here in Texas, we have Michael Morton.
Yes.
If you look at some of these cases, it should bring pause to anyone, because these are people who are going about their everyday life, living a life, and next thing you know, they're being prosecuted for a crime they did not commit. If that can happen to those guys, it can happen to any of us. It can happen to you, Kevin. It can happen to me. It can happen to anyone listening tonight. So anyone who thinks that that won't happen to me because I'm never going to be in that situation, you just don't know. You just don't know.
Another individual I knew, in fact, the very first person that I spoke to on wrongful conviction was one of the 10 finalists for CNN Hero, also out of Texas. And that's Richard Miles, who started Miles of Freedom, an organization out of Houston. Very first person I spoke to about being wrongfully incarcerated. And he was just going home from a friend's house, and cops held him and said, "You matched the description off." And he didn't even remotely match the description, other than he was black. So there are cases, and time again, if you don't have, it seems that if you don't have the resources to hire the best lawyers, that you're going to be up the creek without a paddle.
Oftentimes that, unfortunately, is exactly what happens, Kevin.
And what we have also found is that it's more difficult to prove innocence after a guilty verdict.
I think that's correct. It takes a lot of pieces to come together the right way. It may take tracking down witnesses or finding evidence that wasn't there. It's an uphill task, but if someone's truly innocent and the evidence is out there, someone with the time and resources hopefully can track it down and make a difference.
All right, so let's go back to some of this information that has been buried that could possibly say, Nicole should not have gotten this conviction that she got. So you're saying buried in this is some additional information that could possibly state that, hey, Nicole was not the driver. So her DNA, her blood was found on the airbag. Well, it's an airbag, for one. It's an accident. Two, it's her vehicle. So you would expect that her DNA is everywhere inside her vehicle. Her blood, well, because it's an accident, blood can splatter and go anywhere. Depending on the type of injury that you have, your blood could end up anywhere. So is the argument that her blood was smeared on the airbag in such a way that she had to have been the driver? Or was it just that her blood was on the airbag?
Okay, that's a good question, Kevin. So let me give you a little bit of history here on this. So what happened initially that night is the first two officers on the scene start assessing everything. Nicole is standing outside of her truck on the passenger side when the first officer rolls up. And his video is the one that was turned over after trial started and jury was already selected. He walks over to her, tells her to sit down, which she does after she's given an order by an officer. And then a second officer shows up, less than a minute later. Mm-hmm. The two of them at the scene by themselves with no other officers there yet. The first one that shows up, for just a second or two on his camera, you see Nicole standing up on the side of the road, and you can see her feet. And it shows white objects on both feet. She was wearing white shorts, Her legs were tanned. It was summertime.
Mm-hmm.
And then she had white shoes on. And you can see these on the bar video, too. You can see exactly what she was wearing.
Okay.
And so that's on there. And that wasn't known before trial. Well, at some point, about 6 minutes after the first officer rolls up and catches that little glimpse of her wearing her shoes, he decides to go turn off his camera, which is pointed towards her truck. So he turns it off, and then the other officer's audio is still on. And 2 minutes after, actually less than 2 minutes, I believe it's about 90 seconds after he turns his camera off in his squad car, they magically find a shoe on the floorboard of the driver's side of the vehicle. And that officer, the first one on the scene, Jacob Reavers is his name, he testified at trial that at some point he looked in the truck and saw a white shoe on the driver's floorboard, and he testified that it matched the right shoe that Nicole was wearing on her foot. So now we have him using the left shoe that he found after his camera was turned off, match it up to the right shoe that she's wearing, and that's how he concluded that she was the driver. Well, turns out that her left sock,
Mm-hmm.
bloody sock, she had a couple fractures in her left foot.
Okay.
And, and so got some blood on her sock, and her sock was rolled off her foot like in a ball. Instead of being a full form sock, it's kind of rolled down.
Yeah.
Well, that also wound up on the passenger or on the driver's side floorboard, and it was tossed in the vehicle at some point also. Well, it had a lot of blood on it, so the only blood on the airbag, and it was never proven to be blood. The analysts that did the testing did a presumptive test for blood, which means it passes the threshold that it could be blood.
Yes.
But then in order to confirm it's blood, they had to do additional testing. That additional testing was never done. So it tested presumptive for blood. They did DNA analysis on it, and it came back to a profile that matched Nicole.
Okay.
Well, the location of that blood spot they found on the airbag was on the very lateral edge. And so it could have easily been transfer from the steering wheel, which is the airbag will hit the steering wheel when it inflates and deflates. The DNA profile actually matched the intensity of the peaks on the DNA analysis of the steering wheel, and it didn't match the profile on the sock, which was fresh blood. So it more matched as it might be transfer from the steering wheel, but either way, it's on the lateral edge,
Right.
and it also could be from the sock being tossed in there. There was no other blood in the vehicle anywhere. Okay, nowhere. There was a lot of blood outside the vehicle where Nicole sat down. You could see the blood on the cement right around where her foot was when her sock and shoe were taken off. So and also on the airbag, there was no other DNA on the face of the airbag that would match Nicole. They didn't find any at all, actually. Not everybody will get DNA on an airbag when it hits them. Not everybody sheds DNA. It's not always 100%. But there was no... Nicole had makeup on and mascara at the bar that night.
Yes.
We have pictures of her from the bar. A lot of mascara on her eyelashes. There was no mascara or makeup on the airbag. Nicole had no airbag injuries on her face, her arms, her neck, her torso. She had no injuries that would be consistent with being the driver. The only thing she had was some foot injuries on her left foot, which could have happened from the impact by her foot being in the passenger footwell. So the state's basic theory, if you will, they believe. I should also say, even though the cop testified that she had her right shoe on that matched her left, that
Yes.
right shoe also was photographed by the police photography people. It was photographed being on the driver's floorboard also. So at some point, they also put the right shoe in there as well. So there's no doubt about that, because two different officers said they saw her right shoe on her foot, but it wound up in the truck. So if you play this out, if they're willing to definitely plant the right shoe, well, how about the left shoe and the sock? Okay, so the state's theory is she gets in a wreck, her shoe comes off, it unties itself, it unlaces itself, because it's all spread apart in the pictures from the crime lab, and also her sock rolls itself down, has a copious amount of blood on it, and falls off on the driver's floorboard also.
I wish I had those pictures to show right now.
Well, maybe we can come back and do it again and show these things, because
definitely.
pictures worth 1,000 words.
Definitely.
So then, for the state's theory to be true, you have all this blood, which is a lot, on the sock. Her foot stopped bleeding immediately. They think she crawled out the passenger side after her foot was bleeding a lot, but stopped as soon as the sock came off, crawls out, no more blood, gets out, is walking around. The police camera then shows her standing up with what appears to be shoes on both feet. And then somehow her foot starts bleeding again after she sits down. That's essentially the theory the state has to put her behind the wheel. So you would have to believe the state's theory that the shoe came off, untied itself, unlaced itself, her sock fell off and rolled itself down like in a ball, had a lot of blood on it. She immediately stopped bleeding so she could crawl out of the car and not get a blood trail, get out, and start bleeding again. That's the theory that the state would have to make a jury believe to convict her if the proper defense of her not driving would have been put on at trial.
And for those that are wondering about the why she would have to crawl out on the passenger side, I just put up an image of the accident, the vehicle that was hit, and Nicole's truck. So Nicole's truck is clearly the one on the right. So there's damage on the driver's side. And so we can see that you couldn't get out that door. So you'd have to get out on the passenger side.
Well, that's not entirely true, because we had crash reconstructionists look at the truck and measure how wide it's splayed open at the top. And I believe it was 16 or 18 inches. And it's enough for someone to crawl out the driver's door, either through the window or kind of lift up and go out the top part where it's splayed open. Someone could get out that way, but the state's theory was no one could get out the driver's door, which is not accurate. And therefore, the driver would have had to exit the passenger side. That's the state's theory they put on at trial.
Okay. So where was the defense in this presentation by the state? Where was the defense present? Because listening to you now, that doesn't make sense.
Well, here's the thing, Kevin. Yes, Nicole was at trial watching all the testimony, and so was her lawyer. But remember, her lawyer had already made the decision that because her shoe was on the floorboard and her DNA was on the airbag, he made the conclusion that she was driving. So all he was doing was letting the state put on their evidence, and he was going to try to deal with an involuntary intoxication or getting drugged, or I'm not sure anybody really knows what he was going to do, because he had her change her plea to guilty before the state even rested. And so he never got to put on a defense, but he was seeing all this stuff. But the state wasn't saying that her foot bled here, then stopped and started again. They didn't put on all that. That's just what I'm telling you would have to have been the case for their theory to make sense. So Nicole never put on a meaningful defense. and she pled guilty. And as a result of her lawyer not adequately investigating this, she's in prison. And Kevin, what he did not do, he did not review the audio and video of the police officers. He didn't go talk to witnesses that might have seen something. He just did not investigate anything. He didn't hire a crash expert to look at the crash and see what happened. He didn't hire a DNA expert to see if there's problems with the DNA. The only expert he actually consulted with was a toxicologist because he was concerned about involuntary intoxication. So the start of this problem really started because the wrong defense was investigated. And here we are in 2021, 8 years later.
I'm so puzzled by the defense at the time, because this doesn't make sense to me. So how much time did the defense have with the information, the evidence that was turned over from the state? You said the police video wasn't turned over until they were at trial.
Yeah, no, that's not all of them. The one video that was turned over,
that particular one that shows
right,
Nicole standing and shows
right,
her feet.
Correct. That one was turned over after they selected jury. Trial had already started. The other police videos that were relevant were turned over a month or more before trial. Most of the documents were turned over. It was essentially a case of them not being looked at, for one, or listened to. And number two, there was some delay in turning over some of the evidence as well.
So in a case like that, or in a situation like that, is there any way to go ineffective counsel?
Well, so Randy Schaefer filed her application for writ of habeas corpus, which is basically attacking the conviction after the appeals process is finished. And in a writ, you get to present new evidence that wasn't known at the time or through new investigation.
Right.
And that's essentially what we did. And the writ had two grounds for relief. Involuntary plea, secondary to ineffective assistance of counsel, because her lawyer did not investigate the case, did not review the evidence, did not review the photographs, did not listen to the audio, etc. The second ground for relief was involuntary plea, secondary to egregious governmental misconduct. And of course, that is going to be on the officers, planting evidence, putting her shoes and sock in the car. Mm-hmm. And there's other stuff there too that I'm sure we'll talk about here soon, but they just didn't do a honest job. I think based on the officer testifying that she had her right shoe on, and the fact that it wound up on the driver's floorboard, not just sitting there, Kevin, it was wedged under stuff. It was put there intentionally. So
wait, what?
I think any argument that it's an innocent mistake that some bystander or somebody tossed it in, it just lacks all credibility. Because remember, I told you, there's only two officers on the scene when this shoe is found. It's found 90 seconds after one of them turns off his camera and audio. Fortunately, the other officer's audio was still on, and we actually hear them make this miraculous find of the shoe. So we know this happened before a bunch of other people were there, because it's all recorded for all eternity. And
right.
This wasn't known by anybody until a couple years after trial. Well, it might have been known by the prosecution. It might have been known by the cops. but it certainly wasn't known by anybody working on Nicole's behalf.
All right, so we've been talking about evidence and defense and the actions of the state and the actions of the defense at the time. But so if Nicole wasn't driving, then who was?
Well, I guess that's ultimately the $1 million question, Kevin. But we have some clues, and I'll tell you what they are.
Okay.
On one of the officers named Cody Harmon, he at the time worked for the Shenandoah Police Department, and he was working that night, and he responded, and he was the second officer to arrive.
Mm-hmm.
He's the one whose audio stayed on after Jacob Reavers turned his off. So 2 times on Cody Harmon's audio, he's talking to Nicole and asking her questions like, were you in there by yourself? She said, no. He said, well, who was in there with you? One time she said, I was up front, but I was the passenger. He said, well, who was in there with you? We need to know, see if they're hurt, stuff like that. And twice she clearly says Cambiz. That's Kambiz.
Mm-hmm.
And Cambiz is a guy who was at the bar buying her drinks that night before closing. His name is actually Cambiz Duran. That's Duran.
Cambiz Michael Duran.
Cambiz Michael Duran. He's got a rap sheet as long as my leg, probably.
How tall are you now?
How tall am I?
You know.
Not as tall as his rap sheet.
You know.
So Cambiz is well known around the community. He's been in trouble with the law a lot.
Yeah.
Most of his stuff is dismissed. But anyway, she specifically named him as the person driving. And they completely ignored her. And, the shoes wind up being put in the driver's seat, and they prosecute her as the driver. And the fact that she had no memory of what happened, she didn't really know. One of the most common questions that people ask is, well, if she has no memory, how does she know she wasn't driving? Well, the answer is real simple. We have all the evidence. We have photographic evidence. We have video evidence. We have audio evidence. And we have eyewitnesses. We have crash reconstructionists. The amount of evidence that indicates she was in the passenger seat is enormous. The evidence that puts her in the driver's seat really does not exist unless you want to count the planted shoes and whatever got transferred onto the airbag from the police being in the car, the bloody sock being in the car. But other than that, they have nothing to put her in the driver's seat. And we have an enormous amount of evidence that completely refutes her being the driver.
Eyewitness evidence, you said?
Yeah, we have, there's one eyewitness. His name is Arnis Buchanan. He, when Nicole's truck was on the right shoulder of I-45 southbound lanes, and it was pointing north with the headlights pointing into the oncoming traffic shortly before the accident. And Arnis Buchanan was driving a Dodge Ram pickup truck with, I believe, a 6-inch lift kit on it and some large tires, maybe 36 or 38-inch tires. And he almost had a head-on collision with Nicole's truck himself. Mm-hmm. He saw the lights, started slowing down because he thought it was a cop maybe on over there, so he was slowing down.
Right.
Well, as he slowed down, Nicole's truck starts coming out at about a 15 to 30 degree angle, crossing in front of him. So he slows down and swerves. Her truck is just coming off the shoulder, so it's not going very fast yet, and he's slowing down. And as he swerves to miss her truck, the mirror of his truck and her truck are only like a foot apart, and he looks over into the cab of the truck. He doesn't see the driver because he's looking in front of the driver all the way over to the passenger seat, and he saw a female in the passenger seat belted in. And he told people that night at the scene. He told officers and EMS personnel, and they were actually going around looking for maybe the driver jumped off the bridge and shimmied down on a pine tree or fled somewhere. So they were looking for this person who was driving. But Arnis didn't actually see him because he only had a second and just saw a female in the passenger seat. Arnis provided an affidavit to all of this.
Mm-hmm.
And based on the angle he had, he even described a female with white shorts. Okay. And had Nicole been sitting in the driver's seat, he couldn't have seen her legs. He could not have seen what she was wearing because the door of her pickup truck would have blocked that view. But because he was seeing clear across to the other side, he had an angle that he could actually see what the passenger was wearing. So, and he knew that it was white shorts before it was even released through the media what she was wearing that night.
That was going to be my question.
Yeah. He also told his passenger what he saw that was with him. He had a female passenger who didn't really look in the truck at all. She was one of the 911 callers. He got home that night, told his mother, told his grandmother. They all say, yeah, that's what he saw. And a crash reconstructionist met with Arnis Buchanan because it just didn't make any sense what he was saying, how he could see that.
Yes.
I think everybody was thinking he was looking through the windshield. And how do you see somebody shorts looking through the windshield? Well, once he showed him what happened, it was very clear the trucks were side by side as they were missing each other. And he looked straight through the side window all the way over to the passenger side. And that's what he saw. So we have Arnis Buchanan, who saw a female in the passenger seat literally 2 seconds before the accident, because he looked back after he missed getting hit himself and saw the crash. And he was going southbound. So he stopped, and Nicole's truck was going north, and the car that got hit by her truck was heading south. So he went over to the car where the two people were deceased and the third one injured, and he helped them out. He never went 100 or 120 feet down the road by Nicole's truck at all. So he never even saw Nicole that night. All he saw was a female in the passenger seat, and he never went and saw anybody else by the truck that whole night because he stayed by the car.
Gotcha.
So another witness said in his written statement that I don't know where the driver is or the direction he fled. That was a guy named Fisher Hampshire. He did not testify in court. A third witness named Stephen Ramirez put in his report there was the only occupant in the truck was a female in the passenger seat. That was in his written statement twice. So, everybody figured or thought that the driver just, after the wreck, got out of that truck as fast as he could and fled. And that's kind of where we're at with the whole thing. But Nicole did give us an indication by naming Canvas specifically when asked by the police that night.
And she did that twice.
Yeah, she says his name twice.
Now, I can tell you this from my own experience. Fort Lauderdale, Florida, driving on 441, I see an accident. And the person driving the car got out the back door on the passenger side before the passenger in the front seat.
Yep. That's entirely possible too, because there are pictures at the scene, Kevin, that show the passenger door front and back both open. Now, so the police probably shouldn't be opening the back door, They shouldn't be in there. It should go to the crime lab to be processed appropriately.
Right.
But there definitely are photographs at the scene of that back passenger door being open, and that's certainly one of the routes that that the driver could have escaped. No question about it.
Now, all of this is in the information that was turned over to the defense during the trial. Some of it
Uh,
after the trial
yeah.
started.
Well, no. That's not right. So Arnest Buchanan, what he saw, his written statement was just very brief. He was kind of upset, just wrote a quick statement, got out of there. The defense never talked to him or his passenger or anybody. So what Arnest Buchanan seeing a passenger, female passenger, belted in the passenger seat was not known to the defense. In Arnest Buchanan's affidavit,
Yes.
he said that one of the prosecutors in Nicole's case, named Andrew James, he said Andrew James, he talked to Andrew James prior to trial, told Andrew that he saw a female in the passenger seat. He said that Andrew said that's not possible. That's not what the evidence shows, and you can't testify to that. And yeah, and Andrew James put him on the stands. He didn't specifically elicit that testimony, but Arnest blurted it out. And the next witness that testified after Arnest was his passenger. We talked to her at length. She also said that Andrew James wanted her to lie in the stand and say that her and Arnest disagreed, and she only saw a driver. Well, so she did say that she disagreed with Arnest and she just saw one person driving. Well, turns out she said she never looked in the vehicle at all. She wasn't driving. She did not ever look in the vehicle. So we have two witnesses independently saying Andrew James, one of the prosecutors, was trying to suppress exculpatory evidence.
Right.
So that's what happened back then. So that they definitely hid favorable evidence.
Now, of course, there are many that say, "Hey, listen, these are what for what reason would an attorney have to lie? Why would an attorney have to, especially the state, why would they have to hide evidence when it's so clear cut and clearly for a win? Clearly
Well,
because they want to, and you know, this may not be your view, but it's definitely mine.
well, I think that's a factor. Another factor in this case is that this case, you see these cases that make the news, and you kind of wonder, well, why that case and not another one?
Right.
For example, the Scott Peterson, Lacey Peterson case.
Yes.
Why that case? Married women get murdered by their husband all the time. What makes a particular case grab media attention? I don't know the answer to that, but this particular case grabbed local media attention, and it was on the news all the time. Every time something would happen, it would be on the local news. And the news is always never favorable to Nicole. It's always the state's version of everything. One of the prosecutors had political aspirations. He was running for judge in a different county, Warren DeProm. He lost, but he used Nicole's case and his tough on crime stance in her case as one of his campaign cases. The judge, Nicole's judge, Michael Seiler, he also was running for re-election the next year or so. He also used Nicole's case on his campaign website as his tough on crime stance. And just a side note, Michael Seiler was forced to resign from the bench in lieu of criminal prosecution for actions unrelated to Nicole's case. But still, it was a political hot potato, and everybody was trying to use Nicole's case to further their career. And in the process, it seemed more like the ends justify the means rather than seeking justice in the case.
Right. And people argue that they wouldn't have any agenda to do such. Listen, we have seen time and time again where the prospect of success, whether it be monetary success or positional success, the prospect of success will drive people to do certain things. And here you have, I didn't even think about that, Frank, to be honest with you. I did not think about the showboating, the using it as a catalyst, using a case as a catalyst. And here you have it. Out of Oklahoma, that famous prosecutor that was on the Julius Jones case, Cowboy Bob.
Yep, I know who you're talking about.
He was like, I don't care, I'm gonna win.
I think a lot of prosecutors win at all costs is their attitude, and I think if they pick the cases that they take to trial,
Yes.
and they dismiss the ones that they shouldn't prosecute, I don't have a problem with that, Kevin. I mean, I'll be the first person to admit that there are a lot of really bad people that do a lot of really bad things, and we need to make sure that they're off the street so they don't harm our families. But somebody has to be a good gatekeeper to figure out which case is which and make sure you're prosecuting the right people with the right evidence. And in this case, Nicole's case,
Yes.
I think we had a lot of people that had other agendas, wanted to win. And one other thing I haven't mentioned yet, one of the prosecutors, for reasons I don't quite understand, became good friends with the victims' families of this crash. And let's not forget, there are 2 deceased teenagers here that lost their lives, and their families obviously will never get to see them again. So
Right.
we understand that. Nicole understands that. It was Nicole's truck that was in that accident. So, she understands that, even though she wasn't driving, she understands that, everything that happened that night ultimately ended up in her truck being what killed 2 people. So not making light of that, because there's still justice that needs to be served for them as well. But for some reason, the prosecutor became probably inappropriately friendly with the family. And I think now it's a case where I think it's a case right now. It's fight and protect the conviction at all cost, and let's not really look at it for what it is. Like I said, they don't have any evidence that puts Nicole in the driver's seat. Every bit of evidence puts her in the passenger seat. What we have, Kevin, is we have a DNA expert that says, based on the DNA of Nicole, where it was found, a chunk of her tissue was found on the passenger door armrest. Everything else was contamination, stuff moved around.
A chunk of her tissue. So she was injured.
Yeah, maybe during the wreck, she scraped her arm and a little piece of skin came off her arm or something. That's the human tissue that tested to be Nicole's DNA. Other stuff we have 3 crash experts that all say that her injuries are only consistent with being a passenger. One of those experts, I might add, is someone that one of the prosecutors told us to have a look at the case. And if this particular crash expert agreed that there was a problem and that Nicole was the passenger and those were shoes on that video, that this prosecutor, Warren DeProm, would get on board and help us get this conviction overturned and provide an affidavit for us. Well, his number one crash expert we contacted, named David Pearson.
Yes.
He's now retired from the Harris County Sheriff's Office. He looked at the case for us, and we got Warren DeProm back, met with him again, and David told Warren, yeah, this girl needs a new trial. She wasn't driving. She's wearing shoes. They're planted. This is a problem case. Well, Warren, instead of being a man of his word and helping us out like he said he would, he started dodging phone calls and wouldn't do anything. And to this day, he's never given us an affidavit or helped us in any way. So we have a mechanical engineer who's also a radiologist that reviewed it. Nicole had a hematoma in her left internal oblique muscle, and that is exactly where the seat belt joins together and buckles. So during impact, when her torso or her body kind of twisted in the passenger seat with the belt buckle,
Right.
it kind of pushed real hard on her side right there, where the
Right.
left internal oblique muscle is, and caused an intramuscular hematoma that was seen on CT scan taken at the hospital around 5 o'clock that night or that morning.
Now,
So-
in layman's terms, that's like a bruise on our thigh.
No, it's not on her thigh. It's if you put your left hand down on your lower abdomen to the
Yeah.
side,
Yeah.
it's right over there. I mean, imagine sitting in the passenger seat, putting your belt on over your shoulder, and putting that buckle into the snap there.
Right about at your hip.
Right where that snap is exactly where that hematoma is on Nicole. And that's because when that accident happened, her body twisted trying to move toward the left side of the truck. And when it twisted, that buckle dug into her right there and caused that hematoma. That's additional evidence she was sitting in the passenger seat.
Huh. Now, you see, when I talk about individuals that claim their innocence after being convicted, one of the things that you often hear is they didn't have any investigators. The bulk of this investigation, did it happen post-conviction or pre-conviction?
100% of everything we talked about is post-conviction, because her trial attorney did not investigate anything. Like I said earlier, when he found out her left shoe was on the driver's floorboard and there's DNA on the airbag, he made the decision right then that she was driving. Therefore, we have to go with a different defense. And he never investigated anything.
You know, I am beyond words. Because this now seems more of a case of I don't see where a jury would say, well, beyond reasonable doubt, Nicole is guilty.
Well, I agree. I think had this thing been investigated the way it has been now,
Yes.
the state was not ready for a defense that she was not driving. I think if they would have presented that the shoes are on her feet, they wind up in the vehicle. Here's both shoes. He testified one's on. Now it's in the vehicle. We got a witness saying that she was in the passenger seat. I don't think there's a snowball chance in Hades that they could have got a conviction. The problem is the state withheld evidence. They asked witnesses to lie. They didn't turn over stuff they should have. Her lawyer did not investigate, and she pled guilty. So the jury then had to find her guilty and assess the punishment. So
Right.
the jury did not hear any of the stuff that we're talking about tonight, Kevin. And the state is fighting as hard as they can
To protect the win.
to prevent her from getting a new trial.
So the habeas, you mentioned the habeas. So clearly nothing came of that.
Well, it's not exactly over yet. There was as much corruption in the habeas proceeding as there was in the original investigation,
You've got
unfortunately.
to be kidding me. Talk to me.
I'm not. Well, so in the
I'm not
habeas
surprised,
proceeding,
by the way. This is
yeah,
Texas.
yeah. Well, first off, in the context of an involuntary plea
Yes.
for ineffective assistance of counsel, uh, probably the big case that we use for ineffective assistance of counsel is Strickland versus Washington.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a two-pronged test. First prong is the lawyer has to be deficient. Then the second prong is the prejudice, where, but for the lawyer's deficiencies, there's a reasonable probability that there would have been a different outcome. Well, that's basically for a jury trial. When you have a guilty plea and it's an involuntary plea, that second prong of Strickland changes a little bit. You still have to show deficiency on the lawyer. And then the prejudice becomes that the person pled guilty and they did not get the proceeding. They did not get a guilt innocence trial so a jury can make a decision.
Right.
So in Nicole's case, her lawyer was clearly deficient. He investigated nothing. He didn't talk to witnesses. He didn't look at anything. Well, and then the prejudice prong is that she didn't get a trial.
Yes.
Well, the state, first off, when you analyze that, it's analyzed from the perspective of the trial attorney at the time of trial. So you have to go with what was known at the time of trial or whatnot. Okay. Well, what the state wanted to do when the writ was filed, they wanted to go do a whole bunch of extra investigation and try to find out new stuff. And then what they did is they went to the trial. First off, Mike McDougall, the trial attorney, gave us an affidavit basically saying he didn't investigate anything. He didn't know any of this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And had he done an investigation, he could have put on the defense that she wasn't driving. Well, the prosecution, the appellate prosecutor during the first habeas hearing basically conceded that Mike McDougall was deficient. And there's no need to get another affidavit from him, no need to call him in to testify. We know he was deficient. Well, that met the first prong of Strickland.
Okay.
Now we had to get the second prong. Well, somewhere after that hearing on October 11th, 2017, that prosecutor changed his mind because three prosecutors went to see Mike McDougall, and they presented him with all this new stuff that they went and did. DNA testing, some for other stuff, talking to witnesses who didn't even testify at trial. And they went and presented him a bunch of stuff, and they got him to do another affidavit, which they wrote for him, and basically saying that even though he told us in the first affidavit that he could have put on a different defense, now that he knows all this new stuff, he wouldn't have done it. Well, that carried the day, I guess. Since then, Mike McDougall has done another affidavit now. And he basically said that the prosecutors, those three prosecutors, misled him. They deceived him, and they made him think the stuff they were presenting to him was actually, number one, true, and number two, available in 2013 at trial. And it was neither. It was neither accurate information, and it definitely was not available in 2013. So he recanted that affidavit and said that they committed serious prosecutorial misconduct, that Nicole did not get to put on the defense that she was not driving, and she should get a new trial. So that's the status of where we're at right now. That affidavit, along with a suggestion for reconsideration, is before the Court of Criminal Appeals right now. It has been since, I believe, July 7th of this year. Any given Wednesday, they could issue an opinion and send it back to the court for more hearings or who knows what. We're kind of in a holding pattern waiting on that right now.
So, as we speak, you are mounting the habeas is continuing.
Well, it was over because we got denied relief, and then we found more evidence were those three prosecutors, and those three prosecutors were Andrew James, who was one of the trial attorneys, Brent Chappelle, who was the appellate prosecutor, and then kind of the head of the appellate division at the time, Bill Delmore. The three of them went to Mike McDougal, and they kind of put the full court press on him. Why it took three prosecutors to go lean on him, I have no idea, but that's what they did.
Strength in
And
numbers.
bear in mind, Mike McDougal's a former elected district attorney in Montgomery County. He actually hired Andrew James, and he
So
has said
there's a
he has
trust
said,
factor.
well, Andrew James no longer works for Mike McDougal. He works for the new DA. And it was Andrew James' trial case. But anyway, at any rate, Mike McDougal said they committed serious prosecutorial misconduct, and he said that Nicole did not get a fair trial, and she should be given a new trial. So that's where we're at right now.
So,
But go ahead, Kevin.
so what can come of this accusation of prosecutorial misconduct?
Well, the habeas court. Well, first off, let me tell you what happened, how we got there. So we filed the writ habeas corpus on September 11th, 2017. We had a status hearing on October 11th that year. The trial judge recused herself from the case that day. She was new to the bench and recused herself. And then about 5 days later, the regional administrative judge appointed James Keeshan to oversee the case.
Okay.
Now, that, James Keeshan has his name on a building right across the street from the courthouse, the James Keeshan Administrative Building. It's highly unlikely that somebody's name who's on a building across from the courthouse is ever going to make any judicial decision contrary to the interest of Montgomery County. Okay. Now I don't know if that's true or not, but it seems highly unlikely. Okay. Secondly, James Keeshan is well known in Texas.
Yes.
He's the judge who at the time was the elected district attorney in 1980, I believe. And he prosecuted and sent Clarence Branley to death row. And for your listeners who have no idea who Clarence Branley is, I'll tell you briefly. Clarence Branley was an African-American janitor that worked at the Conroe High School. Mm-hmm. And it was summertime, and he and two or three other janitors, they're all white, were working. And there was a summer volleyball tournament taking place at the high school. Well, one girl, I can't recall her name. I think her name was Ferguson, last name Ferguson, but she went in to use the restroom and was never seen again. And they went searching for her. They found her. She was been raped and murdered, and they blamed the janitors. And because Clarence Branley was African American, he took the fall. He was prosecuted, sent to death row, and I believe he was 5 days away from getting the lethal injection when he finally got a stay of execution. They finally had a fair hearing, and it was determined that James Keeshan probably was having secret meetings with the judge, and some other stuff was allegations made. That was Keeshan's. That's probably what he's best known for. He later became a judge in Montgomery County, retired, and then took senior status, and he was brought out of retirement to oversee Nicole's case. So it kind of looks like it was a foregone conclusion before we got started in the habeas process, but there's no way to know that. But more importantly, the state was bringing in false evidence, putting things in their pleadings that weren't true. They were getting witnesses to make false affidavits. So what Keyshan had to review,
Yes.
let's just say, for the sake of argument, he was trying to do the best job he could and be absolutely fair. Well, he had an affidavit from Mike McDougal that was obtained through fraud, deceit, and misconduct. He
Right.
used that affidavit in a decision to deny or recommend denial of the relief for Nicole. Maybe had that affidavit not been obtained by those 3 district attorneys, maybe Judge Keyshan would have came to a different conclusion. There's also a witness they went to and got an affidavit from that's just demonstrably false. I mean, it's egregious how bad it is. And we've got proof of that as well. We got video proof, audio proof. It's probably more than we need to get into right now, but long story short, they went to a witness who on audio was caught talking to the police 2 times that night of the accident. One time he said, "We don't know where the driver is."
Mm-hmm.
She was the passenger. Another time, the cop asked him about 40 minutes later, "Was she the driver?" He said, "No, she was the passenger." He said, "Well, did the driver jump out or over her?" He said, "That I don't know."
Right.
And then what he said is, he said, after Nicole's truck spun and came to a stop, he put on his blinker, he pulled over, slowed down, went to the shoulder, got out, and went to check on Nicole. He said she asked if she was okay. She nodded, so he went to the car. In his affidavit, believe it or not, Kevin, the state had their investigator go, and then that investigator, John Stevenson, and Brent Chappelle got an affidavit from this guy named Stephen Ramirez. In that affidavit, Ramirez actually said that he saw the wreck happen. He pulled over alongside the shoulder, and he sat there and watched the wreck finish, watched Nicole's truck spin towards him 15 feet from him. He got out and sprinted over there and said she's the only one in the truck, and she was in the middle. Well, photographic and video evidence that we have from that night show that Stephen Ramirez's vehicle is 70 to 75 feet from Nicole's truck. And it's an absolute physical impossibility for someone to see the wreck happen, pull over and stop their vehicle before the wrecked vehicle stops. It's impossible. There's about a 2-second reaction to even get to the brake pedal after you visualize the wreck. That wreck was over in like 2 seconds because it was a head-on collision, and a tire came off and it's dragging and there's a lot of friction. So everything was a lie. But they got that false affidavit and submitted it, and as more evidence that Nicole was driving. And remember what I told you, that stuff can't really be used to determine whether Mike McDougal was ineffective in 2013, because this witness did not testify. So what the state tried to do is they tried to get all this new stuff, albeit not true stuff, just new stuff, manufactured evidence,
Right.
and go back and try to insert it into what Mike McDougal would have done in 2013. And honestly, Kevin, it worked. But now they got caught.
That part.
An interesting side note, 2 of those prosecutors that got caught and the affidavit was submitted to the Court of Criminal Appeals this summer,
Yes.
2 of them now have left the Montgomery County District Attorney's Office. One's down in Houston, and one I hear went to Dallas. So we don't know why they left, but is it related to getting caught in this mess or not? Who knows?
But here's the issue that I am having. No, they have left, knowing that they have done something like this, and are in a position to do it somewhere else. They're still
Well-
practicing, aren't they?
Well, I will say this. Tomorrow morning, I'm filing a 66-page complaint with the state bar against one of the prosecutors.
Perfect.
And hopefully, God willing, he will get disbarred in rapid fashion, and he can never do this to anybody else. And bear in mind, Kevin, I don't think for one second these prosecutors got up one day and said, oh, I'm going to be corrupt today. I'm going to ask witnesses to lie.
Yeah.
I'm going to hide evidence. This is a way of life.
I believe that. I believe that wholeheartedly, and more as I get familiar with some cases out of Texas, and I don't know why it is Texas so much. Majority of the cases that I've come across are out of Texas. One out of Arizona, the second voided case in U.S. history, the voided conviction in U.S. history. Both of them happened in Arizona. This one was someone that I spoke with on this broadcast. His name is Daniel Gutierrez. You can look him up. Second voided conviction in U.S. history, Arizona. And then majority of the others that I've been exposed to are coming out of Texas. And that concerns me. It concerns me a lot because Florida is not that far from Texas, and our somehow there's this connection down south. You know, Texas, Louisiana, Alabama, Florida, Georgia, South Carolina. There's this little connection, and it's scary. Now, here you have. Let me toss this question out there really quickly. Did you check on the oaths of these judges by chance?
Yes, I did actually. There's two judges involved in Nicole's case. Michael Seiler, he was the trial judge.
Mm-hmm.
He was appointed. The county grew, and they needed another district court, and they created a new district court, the 435th, and he was appointed by the governor, I believe, and then he was elected a few times. He had 6 oaths of office on file. They all appear to be in order. They follow the correct time frame.
Okay.
James Keeshan, on the other hand, he's been a judge since the 90s. He's been retirement. He's been a visiting judge, etc. Secretary of State did not find a single oath he had on file with Secretary of State. And that's the person who maintains the judicial oaths.
Wait, are you saying the man with the name on the building that was he was the one that sat over the habeas, correct?
That's correct, yes.
So the man with the name on the building that sat for the habeas has no oaths?
Well, the Secretary of State told me they could not find any, so I assume the answer is he doesn't. I have no reason to believe that the Secretary of State just said couldn't find him. His name is spelled correctly on what I sent, and I gave him the right court, the right name, the right time period, and they found nothing, but yet they found 6 for Michael Seiler. So I have no reason to doubt that what the Secretary of State sent me is not accurate. I have no reason to doubt its accuracy.
So for those that are listening and have been listening to these broadcasts, and you've heard David Fisher, who is a legal consultant out of Texas, talk about judges not having oaths. Now here it is, another case in Texas. In fact, this judge has his name on a building. No oaths.
That's right.
Now you, how far fetched do you think it is, listeners? Now, when you look at something like this, and you refer back to Rodney Reed's case, how far fetched do you think it is? Michael Morton was almost executed by a judge with no oaths, if my memory serves me correctly.
I don't think Michael Morton had a death sentence. I think he was life.
He was life.
Yeah.
But I can tell you, Michael Morton is now talking with Rodney Reed.
That's correct, yes.
Yeah. I know that for a fact.
Yes. Can I make one more comment, Kevin, about something
Sure.
I forgot to say?
Sure. Sure.
Another piece of evidence that in this case that I think is important, and I think your listeners will appreciate it, and I'm really kind of throwing it out there for them.
Mm-hmm.
Nicole's roommate at the time had a brother named Yates.
Mm-hmm.
That's Yates, Yates. He was supposed to meet Nicole. Him and a friend were going to meet Nicole back at her and his sister's apartment shortly after the bar closed. Well, he started trying to get a hold of Nicole because she didn't show up at the apartment. And I think he called her around between 2:35 and 2:40, somewhere in there, maybe 20 minutes before the accident. And he testified at the grand jury that he called her, she answered the phone and said that she was pulled over throwing up alongside the road. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Now, the state presented that in trial as evidence that she was driving. Well, that's not what that means, Kevin. If you came down here to Texas and you and I went out and had a bunch of drinks,
Yes.
or I did, and you were going to drive me home and somebody called me, I'm not going to say I'm pulled over alongside the road throwing up, but Kevin's driving. I'm just going to say I'm pulled over throwing up. Well, they kind of twisted that around to make it look like that was an admission she was driving. But here's where it gets real interesting, Kevin.
Mm-hmm.
She was pulled over throwing up on herself. The only vomit seen anywhere that night is on the door sill of the passenger door.
Mm.
And also, after the crash happened, a Walgreens receipt was seen outside the passenger door on the ground, and it had chunks of vomit on it. So there was no vomit anywhere else except on the passenger door sill and on a receipt outside the door. So that kind of looks a whole lot like Nicole was sitting in the passenger seat, leaning out, vomiting, and got some on the door sill.
Yes.
Well, if she was sitting in the passenger seat, leaning out, vomiting, that means somebody else was sitting in the driver's seat.
Correct.
So I forgot to mention that earlier, but that's another piece of evidence that supports her being the passenger.
Frank, we're gonna have to arrange for you to get back on here with some of these pictures,
Oh, absolutely. Anytime, Kevin.
because a lot of the listeners wouldn't believe some of what was presented without some of the documentation. You know, some of these affidavits, some of the pictures from the night of, some of the pictures from the crime lab. So, you know, we can get into that as that side of it. You know, it'll be good so that we can show those to back up some of the things that we've spoken about tonight.
Yeah. Yeah, that'd be a great idea. I think the people who are interested in this case probably want to see that. Hearing me and you talk about it, it's not quite the same as seeing it yourself.
Yes, correct.
I got a couple more things I'd like to say if I could, Kevin.
Sure.
One of the questions that's often asked when people hear about this case, only the driver's side airbag was deployed during the accident. And one of the things the prosecution presented during trial is that only the driver's airbag was deployed. Therefore, the passenger seat was empty.
Mm-hmm.
And that also helped convince Nicole she was probably guilty. But, this is a big but, Nicole's vehicle was a 2006 Ford F-150 crew cab. And it was designed with a gel pad in the passenger seat. It's called an occupant classification system. And I'm sure a lot of your viewers, maybe even you, have this. I have it in my Ford truck. Um, if you don't have anything in your passenger seat, the seat belt, or not the seat belt, the airbag is deactivated. And
Yes.
this was a NHTSA safety thing, so that small children and small adults would not get injured by an airbag. So it was designed that in order to be heavy enough to allow the airbag to deploy in a collision, the passenger or the weight on the seat needed to be that of a 110-pound fifth percentile female. And people will argue, well, wait a minute, my dog sits there, weighs 50 pounds, and he turns the light on. Well, the dog's got his whole 50 pounds there. A 110-pound female is going to have some of her weight on the floorboard. Her legs will offload weight from the seat. She'll be leaning on the back of the seat, maybe put 20, 30 pounds on the back of the seat. Might have her arm on the armrest, which could take weight off. So what they figured out is basically, if you're less than 110 pounds, you're probably not going to exert enough force on the gel pad sensor in the middle of the seat for it to read a adult passenger, and that will cause the airbag to be suppressed for protection of small children and small adults. So Nicole weighed 104 to 106 pounds that night. So she's not
Oh,
supposed
wow.
to. She's not supposed to have an airbag deployment sitting in the passenger seat. That's a question we're asked a lot, and I just want to make sure people who are thinking about that, or Google it and see pictures, understand a little bit about it. And that's not my opinion, Kevin. This is the opinion of a guy named Richard Ruth, who worked at Ford at the time her truck was built. An engineer named Kristen Carr worked in the seat sensor division at Ford. She's given us an affidavit, an interview. She says the same thing. The crash experts, David Pearson, Robin Wright, who've worked on this case, all say the same thing. This is pretty common, that a small adult like Nicole is not going to cause an airbag deployment, even if the accident is severe enough to cause a deployment for a larger person.
Right. Wow. Wow. And wow. You know, there there are some obvious things that we often miss, and that is one of them. You know, we take it for granted that someone is sitting somewhere, and in these vehicles that airbags will deploy, not taking into consideration weight may play a role, and the distribution of weight.
It
That,
definitely matters.
wow. Yeah. We'll we'll need to present some more information on this one for sure. So, if you know, listeners, if you know anybody that missed this one, remember, the podcast is available, the YouTube is available, both of the same name, The Night Shift of DJ Kevin Stew. And tonight's edition, titled, and let me put it up on the screen for y'all once more, just so that you can see it. Nicole Baukus versus Texas. That's pretty much what I've titled it. Because that's pretty much the case. It's and we have learned or heard something repeated tonight that we've heard before. And it might sound like a broken record because of where we're hearing it from, pretty much one place repeatedly. Now you're hearing it from somewhere else. Another case coming out of Texas. And whereas there can be the argument, that it's a racial thing, maybe you can have that argument. But here's a picture of Nicole for you. Those of you that are wondering what Nicole looks like, there she is. Pre-conviction. There, if you look her up by a search engine, you may see another image, a different image of her in her striped jumpsuit, in her prison garb, looking disheveled. But that's Nicole, basically. So it happens to, as I like to say it, I heard it once before, the disenfranchised. If you don't have enough resources, if you don't have enough money, then you could end up in this situation. Hopefully you can get good defense if one is appointed to you by the state. Wish you all the best. If you can manage to get someone on your side, someone like Frank Powell, it seems like you have a pretty good chance of mounting some sort of a defense. Frank, I want to thank you for taking the time out to shed some light on this situation for us and enlightening our darkness a little bit as it relates to this particular case, which clearly doesn't seem to be unique, because this kind of thing can't just happen in a vacuum.
I agree, Kevin. Um, One more thing for your listeners.
Yes.
They can text Nicole, Nicole, on their cell phone. Text Nicole to the number 73075, and they'll sign up for case notifications. And as developments happen, we'll keep them posted. And they'll also get a link back that they can. Nicole's up for parole this year on her first count.
Yes.
They can. There's a link that they can use to provide a support letter with one click for parole, and then they'll also be registered for case updates as they happen. And if I come back on here, we talk again, we'll send everybody who registered a link to a reminder that they're on here. And the goal is to keep the story going and keep as much pressure on the state and the DAs as we can, hopefully get a fair shake. And the last thing I'd say is, I know people are going to want to Google this. I can assure you, anything you find on Google is going to be stuff from 2013 and 2012, with the exception of a couple articles from 2018 when this habeas was denied.
Yes.
And there will be information in there that you read that's just patently false, because it was stuff fed to the media from the district attorney's office that just is not true. So they control the media up to this point.
Mm-hmm.
Here we are talking to you, Kevin. Hopefully we're getting the word out there, and hopefully the truth can spread.
Yes.
And again, text Nicole to 73075, and we'll keep you informed. And
I'm texting it right now.
Hopefully come back for bring some pictures, bring some videos, and let your listeners and viewers see the stuff we've been talking about today, because it's pretty appalling.
I just sent the text. It says, "Thank you for supporting Nicole Baukus. Click this link to help the cause." And there's a link right there. Yeah. Done. I've done my part. Listeners, what are you doing? If you have more questions, okay, let's talk about it some more. And I'm going to bring Frank back. His name is Frank C. Powell. You can look him up. I'm going to bring him back, and we're going to talk about this some more, and I'm going to show you some pictures. Because it's the right thing to do. Nothing more. It's just the right thing to do. Frank, again, thank you. And do pass on my best wishes to Nicole and Nicole's family, the Baukus family. I know they must be going through it, and I'd love to have them come and chat with us also, because there's nothing like hearing from them what they have been going through since 2013.
Yeah, Kevin, that's right. And, like I said, we mean no disrespect to the families who lost their children in this, or their brothers, sisters, nieces, nephews, whatever relationships. We have no disrespect for them whatsoever.
Yes.
But Nicole is a victim in this too, and so is her family. And there needs to be justice for all involved. It's a tragedy all the way around, but having an innocent woman sitting in prison with the prosecutors doing everything they can, corrupt or otherwise, to prevent her from getting a new trial or proving her innocence it's unacceptable at any level. This is America. This is not how it's supposed to work.
On paper, that's not how it works. On paper.
And next time I come back, Kevin, I'll try to get a little message from Nicole in her own voice for your listeners, and
That would be awesome.
Get a couple minutes of her thanking them for support and thanking them for taking the time to hear about her story, because this is an important story, because this happened to her. It can happen to anybody.
There's no telling how many other cases like this exist. And I'm not talking in just Texas. I'm talking across the United States. There's no telling.
Kevin, I wonder how many people from my county here in Montgomery County, Texas, I wonder all the time how many other people this happened to, because the same group of prosecutors were involved. Like I said, they didn't wake up one day. And, one more thing, Kevin, that I want to get out there that people say that, so what we've talked about is police officers turning off their video, planting evidence.
Yes.
We've talked about prosecutors asking witnesses to lie. We've talked about the county bringing in a judge who may or may not have the interest of justice in mind versus, his name on a building. And again, I don't know. I can't get inside his mind.
Right.
But, a lot of people think that this is just crazy and all these people can't be colluding together to do this. But in reality, the county's in trouble on this one, and, they're going to fight like a wounded dog in the corner.
Right.
What we have for sure right now is 100% proven, and anybody can Google this stuff and find the documents. Michael Seiler, the trial judge, had to resign from office in lieu of criminal prosecution for acts not related to Nicole's case.
I've seen that.
One of the police officers, DPS state trooper named Angela Fountain, she filed a false affidavit in this proceeding of Nicole's, but she was forced to resign from being a state trooper last year, I believe, because she got caught on another case falsifying government document. So she lost her job, pled guilty to a felony, and is currently on probation. She's one of the officers that worked the scene. And hopefully there's going to be a few more people lose their job before this is over. So don't think these officers are all necessarily upstanding citizens, because 2 or 3 people already involved in this case have lost their jobs
and have charges filed against them.
Yes, exactly. So hopefully there's going to be more.
Well, let me ask you this, though, on a more personal side for you. Going up against the state like this, aren't you concerned?
Well, I mean, I've had a couple death threats.
Wait, hold up. What? Say what now?
Yeah, I've had a couple death threats already.
Since working on this case?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And so there are police statements of these death threats. So it's documented that.
No, I didn't make a police statement because one of the death threats came 2 weeks after I met with Montgomery County Sheriff Office Internal Affairs officer to file a complaint against one of their officers. 2 weeks later, I get an email through Proton email. It's a secure, encrypted, private email.
Yes.
Proton mail. I got a death threat through that. Someone threatened to said something like, "We're not going to allow this to happen. Do you think we're just going to sit around and let this happen? I'm going to burn your office down with you in it." Something like that.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
People don't threaten people if they're not doing anything that is putting their little their little shindig in jeopardy. People don't
Yeah.
just get death threats or just all willy nilly just because. You are ruffling some feathers.
Oh, I've ruffled them already. I just since May of this year, I've been trying to file a complaint with the Shenandoah Police Department against Jacob Reavers, the officer who turned the camera off and then
Yes.
filed a false affidavit in 2017. When I called there to speak to internal affairs to meet with them and file a complaint, I was told that Jacob Reavers is the lieutenant that runs internal affairs. So, so I kind of laughed and I said, "Well, that's not going to work out because he's the person I'm complaining about." So they told me to talk to the police chief, and that's a guy named Troy Dunlap in Shenandoah. And I left him a message, and he didn't call me back. I called a couple more times. He was not in. Finally, I got to talk to him, and I never told him what my complaint was about, but apparently he started poking around and figured out who I was and obviously what I was going to do. And he made an appointment to meet me at my office sometime in early March. I think it might have been March 4th, Kevin, but I'm not sure without looking at my books.
Right.
The day before the meeting, I got a message from him that the city attorney told him not to meet with me. And so a few weeks later, I emailed him and wanted to meet. And I get a email letter from the city attorney for Shenandoah. And mind you, Shenandoah is a city, it's a municipality of 3,000 people here locally. And the city attorney said that they're not going to take a complaint against Jacob Reavers because the DA's office has already investigated my complaint. And I said, I haven't filed a complaint against Jacob Reavers. And I said, I find it interesting that you're even talking to the district attorney on this. Well, there's no reason they are, except they're all working together to make sure they get their story straight, is my guess. But I'm still trying to get them to take a complaint, and they're refusing to follow their policies and take a complaint and investigate Reavers. So this past week, I emailed the mayor of Shenandoah and the 5 or 4 council members, explained the situation to them, and
Yes.
they're supposed to respond to me on how to get a complaint filed by Friday of this week. I don't know if I'll hear from them, but if not, I'll be making complaints to the accrediting agency for Shenandoah Police Department and the Texas Bar on their city attorney because they're refusing to follow their policies and take a complaint against one of their corrupt officers.
Excellent. And it's good that you're stating that you're taking these courses of action because many people would want to know what course of action to take in a situation like this, and some are afraid, some just don't know. And since you're putting it out there in public, now if something happens to you, there has to be the question, why? Why all of a sudden? What's going on here? No, of course, the people that stand to lose the most are the people that can do something and make it disappear. However,
Yeah. Oh, I've got everything. I've got other people working on this. If something ever happens to me, the band will march on. Trust me. It's not. It doesn't.
it doesn't end with you.
It doesn't end with me, Kevin. And the cause will be well funded long after me.
Well, anybody living in the United States that would like, if they're in a situation for it to be handled justly, if you end up in a legal situation, then you should be concerned about Nicole Baukus. You should be concerned about people like Julius Jones and Rodney Reed. You should
Absolutely.
be concerned.
Yeah. One more thing, Kevin, that I think is important for the listeners to understand. You know, Nicole did go to a bar that night, and she did drink a lot of alcohol.
Yes.
And a lot of people's knee jerk is, oh, she drank 20 drinks. She's right where she belongs. There's nothing illegal about going out and drinking 100 drinks.
Mm-hmm.
If your body can metabolize it and you can drink it, there's nothing illegal about it. There's nothing illegal about being a passenger in a vehicle
While
either.
drunk. Yeah.
Right.
Or otherwise.
And a lot of people want to get into this morality issue that, well, she was there, it was her truck, she must have handed the keys to whoever drove, therefore she was right where she belongs. That's just not how it works, Kevin. And, you know, because I don't think anybody who's listening would ever want to find themselves in a situation. They go out on New Year's Eve or whatever and have a few too many drinks, and they take a limo or Uber or a taxi.
Yeah.
Well, if that taxi, that limo, or that Uber gets in a car wreck and kills somebody, does that person who was being
drunk.
responsible and drunk and not driving, do they want to spend the most of their life in prison because of that?
Right.
If the answer is no, then don't act like Nicole deserves what she got just because she drank that night.
And it was her vehicle.
Correct.
We have so much more to talk about in this case. So much more. And if, again, I cannot emphasize it enough, if anybody thinks that this is happening in a vacuum, it is not. It's just that sporadically we hear of these cases. We hear of one here, we hear of one there, we hear of one around the corner. But it doesn't mean that it's not happening all around. And that right there is what we need to pay attention to. People like Frank Powell are the people that we need to be supporting in whichever way we can. If we have information that we can pass on, if we have a platform like I do that he can get onto to say what is going on, to speak up, to call out the names that he has called out. You notice he has called the names clearly for everyone to hear. If you haven't heard, you go back and listen to the recording. The podcast will be available in the morning. So will the YouTube. It will be posted on kevinstew.com. Go check it out. Frank.
And
yeah.
One more thing, Kevin. I just want to throw this out there. Randy Schaefer is the one who's written all the briefs in Nicole's case here.
Mm-hmm.
I'm working with Randy on it extensively and heavily. Randy recently was given the Lifetime Achievement Award by the Harris County Criminal Lawyers Association. For those who don't know, Harris County.
Congratulations, Randy.
Yeah. For those who don't know, Harris County is basically Houston,
Yes.
which is third largest city in America. I think it's third still. At that awards banquet, he gave a speech. And I think at one point, for about 30 seconds, he kind of said probably the most important thing that I've heard in a long time. And I'll repeat it. And again, this is Randy's words, not mine. It's Randy's experience, not mine. But he said that the question he's most often asked at the courthouse is, when are you going to retire? And he said it's most often asked by prosecutors, not in a friendly, loving way. And he said his answer is always the same. He's going to retire when the state stops prosecuting innocent people, when they stop making deals with witnesses that they don't disclose to the defense or the jury, when they stop woodshedding witnesses, when they stop failing to disclose favorable evidence, and when they stop putting on false testimony. And he said, because then there'll be nothing left for me to do. So you tell me, when am I going to retire? And I think that sums it up, because Randy's life's work is basically trying to help people who have been victims of all of those things he listed. And Nicole's one of those people. So
we'd love to hear from him too.
I'm sure he'd probably be happy to come on one time with us.
Yeah. Let's make that happen. You know, people need to know. We watch these crime dramas on television and think that things go a particular way, when in real life, the stories that we're hearing tonight, that's what happens. So we need to get our heads out of the clouds and look at our community for what it is. You know, there is corruption in our community. And yeah, I use community singular because it's just one community. We have different corners of it, yeah, but it's one community. And there's corruption everywhere. So which one is worse? The person that is committing the partaking and orchestrating the corruption, or the person that knows that it's happening and not saying anything? Which is worse? Frank,
I think they're equally bad, but hopefully, one thing we're hoping is that with people moving jobs and changing jobs and whatnot, we're hoping somebody's going to come forward at some point and spill the beans on all the dirt on this case. Because, you know, something else I did not mention yet is the first two officers on the scene when the shoes were planted, neither of them, they're from two different agencies, one from the sheriff's office and one from Shenandoah PD at the time. They didn't do reports, but they didn't do reports. That one claimed he did, but no one's ever seen it. But two other officers did, one from Shenandoah and one from the sheriff's office. Those two actually colluded, and one officer must have emailed the other his report, because you can tell it's the same paragraph is cut and pasted, the identical words. And so they colluded to get their story straight on this case. It's clear. And that's one of the things I'm going to complain about, because they clearly colluded to get their story straight after the accident happened.
We just keep getting deeper and deeper into this. Crazy. I have no words. And again, not surprised. Amazed, somewhat. That, and my amazement is that it doesn't seem to matter at what period in time. It just keeps happening and happening and happening, and you hear the stories and more and more and more, and the more we talk to people, is the more they're coming out. So
Yeah.
what about the ones who are afraid to talk? What are we gonna hear from them?
No way to tell. There is one more thing worth noting here. You know, when I look at a case and review it, oftentimes when you're looking at it, the person looks guilty. And I admit, when someone first looks at Nicole's case and looks at the trial transcript and reads the news articles and everything, it looks like, oh, wow, she's guilty, slam dunk, you know, she's got what she deserves. But then you got to look a little deeper and see the stuff that isn't in the news, see the stuff that's not in the trial transcript, and see all the stuff that we're talking about tonight, the experts, the affidavits, all the stuff we're gonna show next time. We'll have pictures. Yeah. But for for someone just to Google stuff on any particular crime, you don't know,
Yep.
you don't always see what the reality is. That's the important thing.
I've had to say this in a discussion before. Trial transcripts are just that. They're the record of what happened at the trial. So if you're going to take the trial transcripts and say that here is the fact, well, this is the fact that this information was presented at trial. That doesn't make the information presented true. There's a difference between facts and truths. And so, yes, you're going to get a story reading the trial transcript. And you're going to be asking a question because this is something that happened prior to the point in time that you are reading it. And you may have additional information at that time. So you really have to put yourself into the position of being there then at the time that the transcript was created. And what is presented at that time is not necessarily all the facts, correction, all the truths, or it is the truth being presented in such a way that it is twisted. So it's all about presentation and interpretation.
Yeah, I think that's correct. And here's just an example in Nicole's case that illustrates exactly what you just said, Kevin. The prosecution put 2 or 3 witnesses up there on the witness stand who all said that Nicole admitted that she was driving. Well, when you really drill down and look at everything, what they did is they took that all out of context. For example, at the hospital, a DPS trooper, and DPS here in Texas, for those who don't know, stands for Department of Public Safety, and DPS officers are state troopers.
Mm-hmm.
A guy named Andre Brack, and this is all recorded on another officer's cell phone. He thought he would be in the treatment room recording what's going on. And so he did. And Trooper Brack talks to Nicole on camera, and he says to her something like, there's been a really bad accident, and we're trying to figure out what happened and whatnot. And at one point he says, well, where were you tonight? And she says, I was at my apartment. He asked where she went from there. And she said, I went to the bar. And he said, how did you get there? And she said, I drove. And he said, what were you driving? And she said, a gray Ford F-150. Well, that officer testified that she told me she was driving.
Truth.
Yeah, but not at the time of the accident. So when Nicole heard that,
Mm-hmm.
you know, it made her blink. Okay, that's what I said. What they did put on in trial was that she told the officers the name of the driver. They didn't put on the evidence that she said, I was up front, but I was the passenger. They didn't do all of that.
Right.
And another person was in the ambulance attending to Nicole while she was being transported to the hospital. And that same cop who made the cell phone video of Trooper Brack asking those questions, he put his body-worn microphone on Nicole's gurney, and you can hear him whisper to the EMT girls that he's going to follow behind the ambulance and try to capture anything she says on the way to the hospital.
Right.
So the girls in the ambulance, they know what that means. That means get her to admit she's
Get
driving.
her talking.
Right? Yeah. So the whole thing's recorded because he's following behind, and it's on his audio that we have a copy of. And this is something you can play next time for your listeners. But she's asked, were you driving? And Nicole says, I was, but I stopped. And the girl said, why did you stop driving? And Nicole said, because I was drunk. And the girl says, did you stop before or after the accident? And Nicole says, before. Well, that was presented as Nicole admitted she was driving.
Well, she was driving at one point, not
Yep,
at the point of the accident.
right. Another EMT named Patrick Langham testified that Nicole told him she was driving. But when you listen to the whole 40 minutes of audio, and we have all the audio, Kevin, because two different cops laid their body-worn microphones down next to her to record her statements, which, by the way, is an
Yeah, but
absolute crime.
I was about
That's,
to ask.
yeah, that's an absolute crime. It's called wiretapping, illegal wiretapping. You can't
Yes.
record two other people's conversation unless you're part of the conversation. But anyway, they did that, and everything's recorded. And this EMT, Patrick Langham, is asking her, he says something like, so I understand you're the driver. She said, no. She said, you weren't driving? She goes, I was driving. She goes, okay, so you were the driver. She's like, no, I was driving a long time ago. Okay, well, Patrick Langham testified that she told me she was the driver. So every bit of it was taken out of context. And I don't think that the prosecution did this by accident with witness after witness after witness.
Right. Right. And, on one hand, you can say they did their job. They got whomever it was that they placed on the stand to answer the questions as they structured them. Were you told? Did Nicole tell you that she was driving? Answer: yes. Is that a lie? No. And so it creates that illusion. It gives that impression that at the time of the accident she was driving. But you have to be careful how you answer questions. And since it is strategically structured, then you either answer the question that you were asked or you don't answer at all. And they answered the question that they were asked.
I agree with that, but I think all of the people that were asked that question knew what the implication was, and I think they had an ethical duty to answer. She told me she was driving, but she told me she was driving before the accident and not during the accident. But they didn't do that because, Kevin, these people that work for the state, that work for the hospital district, EMTs, those are government employees. They see the
Yes.
same cops at every wreck, every accident. They all think they're on the same team.
Yes.
And it's just an absolute cesspool of systemic corruption.
That right there. Yes. I think I'm gonna get in trouble along with you. I don't know. I'm hoping I don't. I heard that I was on a conspiracy theory list. Not this Thanksgiving, but last Thanksgiving. My affiliate out of Texas, WGLRO, they got an email with a list of conspiracy theorists, and my name was apparently on that list. So I think I'm gonna get in trouble along with you, Frank.
Well, a conspiracy simply means that two people agree together to do something. And we already have unequivocally two officers coordinating their reports to be identical, parts of them at least. And when I say identical, Kevin, they even have the same words misspelled the same way. Okay.
Oh no.
They have the same punctuation. They have the same everything. It's clearly 100%. They copied each other's work. So that's conspiracy right there to coordinate their story. Of course, nothing's happened to either one of those cops yet, but I'm working on it.
Oh, there's time. There's time.
There is time.
And hey, we have it recorded right here. So at this point, that's one more source for you.
The goal is to get the word out, put pressure on them. Hopefully a lot of people are texting that Nicole to 73075, and our advocacy infrastructure will be reaching out to everybody who wants to help, and we'll make it easy to send letters to administration, police chief, whoever we need to put pressure on to do the right thing on this case. We'll make it easy for anyone who wants to support and help.
Well, what about you and Randy? Are you guys available for contact?
What do you mean by available for contact?
Can people reach out to you directly?
Oh, I'm easy to find. So's Randy. All you gotta do is Google either one of us, and you'll find us. And we have phone numbers.
That's right there. It just I just wanted people to know that you're available. You can be reached. Some people they think, boy, yeah, I heard this person talking, but there's no way to reach them. No, his name is Frank Powell. You can look him up, Frank C. Powell. He's in Texas. You can look him up. Randy Schaefer. He's in Texas. You can look him up.
Yeah, we're both easy to find. We have phone numbers, and we have people that answer the phone if somebody calls.
Frank, I am looking forward to you returning. I'm looking forward to talking with Randy. I'm looking forward to talking with Nicole's family and friends, whomever is willing to come on. I'm even willing to speak with those that lost their loved ones in the car crash. I'm willing to speak with the person that got injured in that car crash.
Well, they're out there, and from my experience so far, Kevin, anytime the local news media talks about this case at all, they've never, ever, to my knowledge, reached out to Nicole's family, but they always reach out to the victims' families. And one family in particular usually has a representative talking and giving their opinion and stuff. So I know they're available, but the news media has never, to my knowledge, reached out to Nicole's family.
Okay. Well, I'll do the other side. I'll complete the circle for them. Since they want to do a half circle, I'll do the other half. I'll do Nicole's side.
All right, I'll let him know, and
Yeah.
just let me know when you want to schedule again, and we'll do it. This went by a lot faster than I thought it would.
We covered a whole lot of ground. I can tell you
Yeah.
that.
Well, we laid a good groundwork for your viewers to come back and see photographs, and like, for example, the photograph of the vomit on the passenger door. That's just going to just cement the fact that phone call about
Yes.
her vomiting.
Yes.
Now we got some vomit to prove exactly which seat she was sitting in.
Right. Right. I'm looking forward to the continuation of this because I have people in Texas. I know people in Texas. I have friends. I have family. I get concerned. I was recently in Texas.
You were here over Thanksgiving because you and I exchanged a few text messages.
Yeah. It's. I was on the road over there. I could have ended up in a similar situation. Listen, everyone that can hear my voice right now, be careful. Have your family members, be careful. Document as much as you can, be as mindful as you can anytime anything happens. You get pulled over by the cops, go ahead and turn on your camera phone. Your camera on your phone. Record it. Cops can record it. You can record it too. Do whatever. Whether it is you call somebody and have them on the line, do whatever you need to do. Because you never know when you're gonna get someone corrupt. And it's unfortunate that we have to put out a statement like that. But that's where we are.
Yeah, I mean, it's true, Kevin. With the exonerations that we know about, for example, let's just take Michael Morton. We brought his name up.
Yes.
He spent 25 years in prison for the murder of his wife. And for your listeners that don't have any idea who Michael Morton is, basically him and his wife had a little bit of a fight on his birthday. And he came home the next day from work, and there was police tape out in front of his house, and his wife was murdered while I believe, a 3-year-old son was there. Well, the prosecutor on that case withheld evidence. It took Michael's team fought for years to get DNA testing on a bandana they discovered was found by the house.
Yes.
And when they tested that bandana, finally, it showed that it wasn't Michael Morton. And it showed the guy's DNA was in CODIS. Turned out the guy had killed another person 6 months later. And had they done a thorough investigation and not got tunnel vision and prosecuted Michael Morton, they might have saved that other person from being killed. And all he did is went home and his wife was murdered. And he spent 25 years in prison. So if anybody out there listening thinks that this can't happen to them, just remember, Michael Morton went home, his wife was dead, and he spent 25 years in prison. That could happen to anybody.
Do you remember who the prosecuting attorney was and who the judge was and the defense was on that case?
The prosecuting attorney was Ken Anderson. After Michael Morton got exonerated, he got disbarred, and I think he spent 10 days in jail for what he did, which is a joke. One of the other prosecutors there that was involved or maybe trying to block some of the DNA testing was a guy named, I believe, John Bradley. That case happened out of Williamson County. But yeah, sometimes when
you remember who his defense was?
The defense lawyer?
Yes.
No, I don't remember. Do you know?
I I suggest as a teaser to the listeners to go ahead and check up and see who the common denominators are when you look at the Rodney Reed case and when you look at the Michael Morton case. See who the players are, all the players are. Because, Michael Morton suffered quite an injustice. And it's unfortunate. But the Innocence Project worked on Michael Morton's case. The same Innocence Project that is working Rodney Reed's case. So that's one of the players right there. But that's for another time to come, because some of even Michael Morton himself.
Were you asking me who was his trial attorney or who was his post-conviction attorney?
Well, do you have any?
I think John Rayleigh out of Houston helped him on the post-conviction stuff to help get him exonerated, along with Bruce Benjett from the Innocence Project. I think we're working on the case. Bryce
Benjett. Yeah. Bryce was Rodney Reed's attorney.
Right.
Bryce, who is now working for the state in Queens. Queens, New York.
Yeah, Bryce has worked on several Texas cases.
Yes. Things that make you go, right?
Yeah. Well, there's also a connection between Nicole's case and Michael Morton's also. And I don't really know how much involvement he had in either case, but it's my understanding the first assistant district attorney, who's now a judge here in Montgomery County, he was in Williamson County during the time period that Williamson County, was fighting DNA testing on Michael Morton for years. He was there. What role, if any, he had, I don't know. But he was also here when they were fighting DNA testing on
Nicole.
not Nicole, they were fighting. Well, he was first assistant while Nicole was prosecuted, but he was also here when they were fighting DNA testing on the Larry Swearingen case, which was a death penalty case, and he got executed a couple of years ago.
Oh, yes.
But they were,
and check and see who the judge was on that case. And then check and see if that name pops up on the Rodney Reed case. And check and see who the defense was. The defense attorneys were for Larry Swearingen.
Larry had the Innocence Project working with him too, and a guy named Jim Ridding out of Houston was doing the post-conviction work, a lot of the post-conviction work for Larry.
Yeah. Names that people listening to my broadcast have heard, which is why I say it, because David Fisher, also known as Mr. Botinsky, speaks of these individuals. And you have called some similar names. Some names that, I guess it's a Texas thing. So some of these names you will hear. And, Houston is right there. And also Austin, right around the way, down the corner, down the street around the corner, Hey, when you're talking about states attorneys, states, whether prosecution or defense, and organizations like the Innocence Project becoming involved in cases, some of these cases will overlap. But when you start talking about corruption, also, now you start seeing a bigger picture. And now you start wondering, how many other cases in just Texas alone? Now, Texas is a large state. Don't get it twisted. When people talk about big states, you talk about Texas. But it's not unique to Texas. It's just that all the ones that I have been talking about, the majority of them are out of Texas.
I'm sure it happens everywhere, Kevin.
That's what I'm saying. I just haven't been able to talk with the people from other places outside of Oklahoma with the Julius Jones case.
Yeah.
And I've spoken with Paris Powell personally, off the air, who was also wrongfully convicted in Oklahoma. But outside of those two states and the one out of Arizona, I haven't really spoken with anyone. But
there's no telling how many people are sitting in prison right now that know in their heart of hearts that they are innocent, and they have no resources, no connections, no one to help.
No help. Which is one of the reasons I do what I do. I didn't plan to, but I have the platform for it, and I will continue to do it. And as long as I get help from people like you, Frank, yeah, it will happen. We will talk about it.
I think the thing to do, Kevin, is just try to spread the word, educate as many people as you can, let them see some of these cases,
Yes.
let them realize what's going on. I mean, this is just a small part of this case, but here's just an example. Brent Chappelle, the appellate prosecutor that worked and did whatever he could to keep Nicole from getting a new trial so far, Jacob Reavers testified in court that Nicole was wearing a right shoe on her foot. He also got an affidavit. Chappelle got the affidavit, and it says that she had a right shoe on. Yet, when it came time to file the final pleadings in the case, Chappelle actually wrote that it's plausible that both shoes came off during the accident. He knows that's not plausible because he knows that he got an affidavit from a cop saying she had her right shoe on. So how can he, with a clear conscience, say that it's plausible that both shoes came off during the accident? He said that because he can't really explain how the right shoe wound up in the vehicle. But what he can do is create as much confusion as he can. And if you just keep creating confusion over and over and over and avoid the truth and the reality of the situation, maybe, just maybe, someone listening is going to believe your BS.
But it goes both ways. And I like you emphasize. I'm glad you emphasized the maybe. Come on. All right. You know, we're going to wrap this up now for real. For real, for real. Because it only gets deeper and deeper and deeper. And I want to have the ability for all my affiliate platforms to hear when this is being presented. All my affiliates have pretty much disconnected now for other programming, but I still want to say thank you to them. One Harmony Radio out of the UK, NIE out of New Jersey, NIE Radio out of New Jersey, Island Worldwide out of New York, WGLRO, Oliwap Radio, Dusick Media Groups out of Texas, the Foundation Radio Network, ClintonLindsay.com out of South Florida. Thank you, thank you, thank you all. PEMGTV.com also. Much love. Frank, Powell, thank you very much, sir.
Thanks for having me, Kevin. Look forward to next time.
Me too. Take care of yourself. Be safe. Pass on my greetings to Nicole and the rest of the Baukus family, please.
Will do. Thank you.
Alrighty. We'll talk. Have a good night. Ladies and gentlemen, Frank Powell. You can go ahead and do your search about Nicole Baukus. Baukus. Go check it out. Find what you find. And then come back and talk with me. You know, let me hear what you have to say. Give me your opinions. I'll take it. But know this. There's always more. And we'll be presenting that more right here on this platform. Because you still need to see what we have to show, right? There are affidavits, there are pictures, there are statements. We're going to show them. And then you put your own puzzle pieces together. See what you come up with. Maybe you can get the answer to why Randy Schaefer and Frank Powell are fighting the fight that they're fighting. And others like them. Why David Fisher is fighting the fight that he has been fighting for the last, 20 years with Rodney Reed. For the cost of $1. Maybe then you'll understand But until then, you can only just, I guess and assume. This has been the night shift with DJ Kevin Stew, Community and Finance Night, as we addressed Nicole Baukus versus Texas. Some are lost in illusion. Y'all take care of yourselves. Have yourselves a good night, good morning, good day, wherever you are in the world. Remember, look out for members of your community. Your community is not just development that you live in, but it spreads far and wide. Those that you pass on the bus, on the plane, on the boat, or the train, whether you walk, ride, or drive, these are members of your community. Do something good for one of them today, because you never know who's going to do something good for you tomorrow. Join me later on for Healthy Love, right here on the night shift with DJ Kevin Stew. But until then, in the background, the sound of Nikki Blaze. The track is called Lost in Illusion. Take care until we meet again.
I see them love. Oh yes, I see them. Lost in illusion. Lost in illusion. I see them love. Oh yes, I see them. Lost in delusion. And now they reside in a state of confusion. Rwanda, Haiti, down in Darfur, Jamaica, they're crying out for murder, hunger. Why can't we come together and help one another? It only takes but one to start a revolution. Please don't play into the illusion. Oh, I see them lost. Yeah, I see them lost. You're in a state of confusion. Wake up, wake up, wake up, yeah. Oh, I see them lost. I see them lost. I see them running, running, running. Oh, I see them running. Oh, my people lost. Oh, my people lost, yeah. I wanna tell it to you now.
Greetings and salutations, one and all. You're invited to tune in to the night shift with DJ Kevin Stew. It airs on Mondays with Community and Finance, Tuesdays with Healthy Love, and Wednesdays with Real Talk from 10 p.m. to midnight Eastern Time. Come spend some time interacting in the stew pot where we keep things bubbling and wind down in musical therapy. The night shift with DJ Kevin Stew is on kevinstew.com, where you're encouraged to have acceptance through enlightenment.